I was sitting in the living room, watching a documentary on TV. It was one of those quiet shows that helped me forget, at least for a while, how empty the house had become since Laura passed away. I wasn't bothering anyone. I wasn't making noise. I just wanted a little peace. Then Derek Vaughn, my daughter, Megan's husband, stormed into the room like he owned the place. He didn't ask what I was watching. He didn't say hello. He walked straight to the TV, reached behind it, and yanked the cable out. The screen went black. He turned to me with a smirk. "That's enough. You sit here watching this garbage all the time. If you want to get smarter, watch something else." Before I could even react, the part that hurt the most happened. Megan was standing right behind him, and she nodded, like I was the one in the wrong. I stared at the dark TV screen. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I didn't yell. I simply stood up and walked upstairs to my room. But that night, lying awake in the dark, I made a decision. From now on, no one was going to turn off my life inside my own house ever again. I'm not telling this story for you to casually listen and scroll past. I'm telling it so you understand something important. Sometimes, the people who walk into your home wearing the face of family aren't there out of love. They're there to take control of your house, your money, and even your right to speak. If you're still watching this, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I want to see how many people out there feel like they're being forced to live with their heads down in their own homes. I may change a few small details to protect the real people involved, but the lesson is real. Staying silent doesn't bring you peace. Silence only makes the wrong people stronger. And after the day Derek unplugged my TV, I started paying attention to everything: bills, the way he spoke, the way Megan seemed to follow his lead. Because I knew this wasn't really about a TV. My name is Frank Delaney. I'm 67 years old. I used to work as an investigative reporter, the kind of job where you get used to being hated, threatened, and occasionally set up by people who don't want the truth exposed. But the irony is this: I didn't almost get taken down in my career. I almost got taken down in my own house. My wife, Laura, passed away 5 years ago. Since the day she was gone, this house has felt like someone drained all the laughter out of it. I kept everything neat, kept my routines, stayed disciplined the way I always had. But the truth is, I wasn't really living. 18 months ago, my daughter Megan and her husband, Derek Vaughn, moved into my house. They said they had lost their apartment and just needed a few months to get back on their feet. I nodded. When your child is struggling, you help. That's what a parent does. But a few months quietly turned into nearly 2 years. And the longer they stayed, the more Derek started acting like he was the one in charge. He set the rules. He criticized everything. He controlled the smallest details of the house. Meanwhile, Megan slowly stopped speaking up. It was like she had been trained to stand behind her husband, no matter what he did. The night Derek pulled the cable out of my TV was only the opening shot. After that, I started looking back at things I had spent months convincing myself were small issues. They weren't. Derek stopped calling me Dad. He stopped saying Mr. Delaney. Instead, he just called me Frank. It sounds like a small thing, but it's not. That's the way someone speaks when they're slowly training you to accept being lowered in status inside your own home. And Megan, my daughter, started saying things that didn't sound like her anymore. One night, she looked straight at me and said something that cut deeper than anything Derek had done. "Mom would be ashamed of you if she were still alive." I stood there, completely still. Not because the words were true, but because I could hear where they came from. Those words had been poured into Megan's head day after day, from Derek, from a life where she had to pick a side just to keep the peace at home. Later that night, I walked past the living room and saw the TV cable still lying there on the floor, like a quiet reminder of what had happened. That's when it finally clicked. Derek hadn't just turned off the TV. He was testing whether he could turn off my place in this house. My right to exist here. And in that moment, I understood something very clearly. I didn't have the luxury of being the nice old man anymore. If I wanted my house and my dignity back, I had to take control again. Not with shouting, not with anger, with a cold head. So I didn't argue with Derek. Arguing would only make Megan think I was just a bitter old man. Exactly the picture Derek wanted to paint. Instead, I did the one thing I've been good at my whole life. I started investigating. I pulled out an old legal pad and wrote the first line across the top, the TV cable. Then I sat down at the table the way I used to when I was rebuilding a case, only this time, the scene wasn't some office or crime site. It was my own house. I started listing the things I had spent months convincing myself were nothing. The utility bills had been creeping up, with charges for things I never used. Derek would take phone calls in a low voice, and the moment he noticed me nearby, the call would suddenly end. Sometimes I'd catch him walking slowly through the house, looking around the rooms not like a guest, more like someone quietly assessing the value of everything inside. And Megan, she had grown quieter and quieter. Every reaction felt careful, like she was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I stared at the page for a long moment. Then I wrote one more line, pressing the pen hard enough to leave an imprint through the paper. Stop being a victim. Start being a journalist. That night, after Derek and Megan went to bed, I didn't sleep. Instead, I got up quietly and walked toward Derek's little work corner. Because if he truly believed I was just a useless old man, then he was about to make the biggest mistake people like him always make. They get careless. Around midnight, the house was completely silent. I moved slowly down the hallway until I reached the room where Derek liked to sit and work. In reality, it was just the place where he kept his phone, papers, and whatever else he didn't want me to see. I pushed the door open a few inches. It wasn't locked. Inside, the room smelled like cheap cologne and energy drinks. Derek's laptop sat right in the middle of the desk. And the thing that almost made me laugh out loud out of pure contempt? No password. He had assumed I was just an old man who didn't understand technology. And that kind of arrogance is exactly how people get caught. I didn't start touching things randomly. Old habits kicked in. I did it the way I used to handle evidence. Screenshots, timestamps, notes in order, no rushing, no sloppy mistakes. First, I checked the browser history, then the email, then a folder that looked like it had something to do with finances. That's when my heart started beating heavier. Several tabs were open with searches like power of attorney, memory care placement, and even one that said how to declare parent incompetent. I froze there for a few seconds, staring at the screen. Then I swallowed the anger down, because at that moment I understood something clearly. Derek wasn't just being disrespectful. He was planning something. And that night, sitting in the quiet of my own house, I started gathering the evidence I would need to remove him from it cleanly, carefully, and completely within the law. I scrolled down to the transaction history and bank statements. At first, I expected to see a few random charges, small things, maybe a couple purchases I didn't remember. But that's not what I found. It was a long list of things I had never bought. Upscale restaurants with generous tips, weekend resort stays, expensive electronics, fashion stores I had never even heard of. I started matching the dates and times. Many of those charges happened on days when I had been home the entire time, which meant the card hadn't been used by someone out there. It had been used by someone living under this roof. I kept scrolling. Then the total number appeared at the bottom of the statements, and for a moment I had to grip the desk to steady myself. $47,000. In just 6 months. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a bank error. This was systematic theft. Derek hadn't spent the money like someone who slipped up once or twice. He spent it like someone who had already decided, a long time ago, that my money was his money. I photographed everything: transactions, timestamps, store names, confirmation emails. Then I wrote one more line on my legal pad and underlined it so hard the pen almost tore the paper. Derek Vaughn, credit card fraud, $47,000. And in that moment, something became crystal clear to me. The TV incident had only been the opening act. What Derek really wanted was to drain me dry before pushing me out of my own house. At first, I thought the worst thing I'd find that night was the stolen $47,000. I was wrong. When I opened his email inbox, I discovered something far uglier: a plan to legally justify removing me from my own home. There was a chain of messages with someone named Patricia Reed, who introduced herself as a consultant for Willow Creek Memory Care. Derek wrote to her the way someone talks about a piece of inventory, not a human being. I have an elderly relative who's been getting confused lately. I'd like to understand the evaluation process for placing him in memory care. My wife agrees. I want to prepare the paperwork quickly. I sat there staring at the screen for a long moment, because now the picture was complete. Derek wasn't just stealing my money. He was preparing to declare me incompetent, ship me off to a facility, and take control of everything I owned. Then I reached the part that made the room suddenly feel cold. Derek asked directly about power of attorney and the timeline for processing a placement. And at the end of the message, he wrote the line that made my stomach drop. Once he's placed, can the house be sold within 90 days? I sat there, completely still. It wasn't just about the money anymore. Derek wasn't planning to simply drain my accounts. He was planning to turn me into an incompetent elderly man on paper, lock me away in a memory care facility, and then sell this house like it was nothing more than leftover property to liquidate. My own house. The one Laura and I built our lives in. The one he was already walking around like it belonged to him. I took screenshots of the entire email thread and saved everything carefully into a folder labeled Evidence. Then I went back to the legal pad and wrote another line. Plan: memory care plus POA plus sell house. And looking at those words on the page, I finally understood the full shape of what Derek was trying to do. This wasn't disrespect. This was a takeover. At that point, I was done hesitating. I knew exactly what I was dealing with now. A man who was stealing from me while also building a paper trail to strip me of my rights and push me out of my own life. And with someone like that, emotion doesn't save you. Evidence does. So I created a folder on the laptop called Evidence and divided it into 3 clean sections: financial, bank statements, suspicious transactions, confirmation emails, and the full total $47,000. Conspiracy. Every email connected to Willow Creek, from memory care to POA to sell in 90 days. Timeline. A written record of every key moment, dates, times, what was said when Derek applied pressure, and when Megan's tone toward me began to change. I took screenshots, saved PDFs, and copied everything onto 2 USB drives, one hidden separately, one kept as a backup. Then I emailed the files to myself too. Because once you realize someone is trying to erase you, you stop thinking like a victim. You start thinking like a man preparing for war. Because I knew one thing for certain. The moment Derek realized I had evidence, he would try to destroy it. Too bad for him. I used to be an investigative reporter. I never let a case live on just one device. The next morning, I stopped entertaining the idea of handling it alone. Men like Derek count on pride. They count on you staying isolated, angry, and reckless. I wasn't going to give him that advantage. So I called Alan Price, a lawyer I'd known from my reporting days, the kind of man who doesn't waste time listening to self-pity. He doesn't deal in feelings first. He deals in facts. I kept it short. 2 points. The way you'd present facts at a crime scene briefing. First, Derek Vaughn used my credit card $47,000 in 6 months. Second, he's emailing Willow Creek Memory Care, trying to build a case that I'm declining mentally, get power of attorney, and sell the house within 90 days. Alan was silent for a moment. Then he said, very calmly, "Frank, this is elder financial abuse, and it also smells like conspiracy." He paused again, like he was mentally lining up the next steps. First thing. Second, preserve every piece of evidence. Third, we prepare to remove them from your house legally. There was something steady in the way he said it. No drama, no outrage, just the tone of someone who had seen this kind of situation before and knew exactly how it ended when handled correctly. For the first time since Derek pulled that cable out of the TV, I felt the ground shift slightly back under my feet, because now this wasn't just my fight anymore. Now it had a lawyer and a plan. Alan told me to send the entire evidence folder through a secure channel. Then he added one instruction that hit like a hammer. Don't confront them until the locks are changed. And whatever you do, don't let them know you already know. So I followed his advice exactly. Before any confrontation, I took my house back first. I waited until Derek and Megan left the house. The moment the front door closed behind them, I picked up the phone and called a locksmith, Mark Rivera, and asked him to come immediately. I didn't replace just one lock to make a point. I replaced everything. Front door, back door, garage entry, side door, every possible way into the house. Mark worked quickly and professionally. He didn't ask many questions, and I appreciated that. Some men know when silence is the right kind of respect. When he finally placed the new set of keys into my hand, I weighed them for a second. A heavy ring of metal. For the first time in 18 months, it felt like I was holding the keys to my own life again. I went around the house and tested each lock one by one. Every single one clicked perfectly, and when the last door shut behind me, I stood there for a moment in the quiet, because this time, the house was truly mine again. I looked out at the street for a moment and said one thing to myself, clear and steady. From now on, Derek Vaughn doesn't walk into my house like it's his anymore. And when they came back, the door would give them the first answer. After the locks were changed, I didn't sit around waiting for them to come home so we could argue. Arguing would only give Derek the chance to twist the story, turn it into some scene about a confused old man having an episode. I wasn't giving him that. Instead, I moved on to the next step, preparing for them to leave. I went upstairs to their room, opened the closet, and began taking out only the things that belonged to them: clothes, documents, personal items. I didn't throw things around. No yelling, no drama. I folded everything neatly. Then I packed it into 4 suitcases, lined them up carefully, because this wasn't a threat, it was a decision. I carried the suitcases downstairs one by one and lined them up neatly beside the front door. Looking at them there, something inside me felt a little lighter, the kind of relief that comes when a person finally decides to stand up after being pushed down for far too long. Then I attached the door chain, checked the porch camera, and kept my phone close with the emergency number ready, because I knew something for certain. When Derek realized his key didn't work anymore, he wasn't going to show up calmly, asking to talk. And this time, I was ready. Later that afternoon, I heard a car pull up in front of the house. I hadn't even reached the window yet when I heard the sound of keys rattling at the door. Then the handle yerked. Once, twice, harder. Derek tried the lock again, but the door didn't open. He started pounding harder on the door, shouting Megan's name and mine like he owned the place. I waited a few seconds, long enough for him to show exactly who he was. Then I walked to the front door and opened it just a hand's width, the door chain still firmly in place. The moment Derek saw the 4 suitcases lined up neatly behind me, the color drained from his face. Megan stood just behind him, her eyes darting back and forth like she was already trying to calculate what was happening. I spoke calmly. No shouting. No long speech. Just the facts. Derek, I know you used my credit card $47,000. I let the words sit there for a second. And I know about the emails you sent to Willow Creek Memory Care. The plan to declare me incompetent, get power of attorney, and sell the house in 90 days. Megan's mouth fell open. What? Derek gave a short, mocking laugh and tried to recover. Frank's being paranoid. He's imagining things. But this time, I didn't interrupt. I simply reached behind me, picked up the top suitcase, and slid it forward until it rested against the inside of the door. Because the next move wasn't going to be another argument. It was going to be the moment Derek realized the story he'd been writing about me had just ended. I cut him off. Stop. I have the evidence. And both of you, get out of my house. Now. Megan turned sharply toward Derek, her voice shaking. What did you do? My dad's credit card? A memory care facility? For a second, Derek tried to keep that calm, superior expression on his face, but his eyes had already changed the look of someone whose mask had just been ripped off in public. Then he snapped at Megan, dropping the act completely. Just stop, Megan. What did you expect, that we'd live like this forever? He gestured toward the house. This place should have been ours anyway. The words hung in the air for a moment. Megan stared at him like she was seeing a stranger. And I realized something in that instant. Derek had just said the quiet part out loud. The part he'd been planning for months. The part he thought he'd hide behind paperwork and legal tricks. But now it was right there, in front of both of us. I looked straight at him and said slowly, "So you're admitting it?" Derek tilted his chin up and gave that same smug little laugh. "So what if I am? That money was going to end up with us eventually anyway." He glanced around the house like he was already measuring the place. An old man living alone in a house worth nearly $800,000. For a moment, no one said anything. Megan stood there completely frozen, and I could actually see the exact moment it hit her, the realization settling in piece by piece. The arguments she thought were just about keeping the peace, all of it suddenly looked different. Not like a disagreement between family, but like she had been slowly led somewhere, step by step, without realizing where the path ended. Derek tried to step forward and push the door wider, but the chain stopped him cold. The metal snapped tight, holding the gap exactly where it was. I didn't move an inch. "Your things are right there," I said, nodding toward the suitcases. "Take them and leave my house. Now." And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Megan didn't stand behind him. She stayed where she was. She looked at me, eyes red, like someone who had just woken up from a long, confusing dream. Derek realized he wasn't getting through that door, so he switched tactics immediately. He pulled out his phone and dialed the police, and he made sure to raise his voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Yes, I need officers here," he said. I almost smiled, because Derek still thought he was running the same play, the one where I looked like the unstable old man, and he looked like the responsible son-in-law trying to help. But this time, the story wasn't his to control anymore. A little while later, 2 officers arrived, Officer Harris and Officer Cole. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't try to out-talk Derek. When they stepped onto the porch, I opened the door calmly, handed them the deed to the house, and said one simple sentence: "This house belongs to me." They were staying here temporarily, and I have evidence they've been defrauding me. Then I handed over the credit card statements, the total $47,000, along with printed copies of the email chain Derek had sent to Willow Creek Memory Care about declaring me incompetent and selling the house. Within 90 days, Officer Harris read through the pages quietly. When he finished, he looked at Derek for a moment. That one look said enough. Then he spoke clearly. No hesitation. No sugarcoating. "Mr. Delaney is the homeowner. He has the right to ask you to leave." He tapped the papers lightly. "And based on what I'm seeing here, there may also be signs of elder financial abuse." Then he looked Derek straight in the eye. You need to collect your belongings and leave the property now." Derek had nothing left to say. The words just died in his throat. Megan stood a step behind him, pale and quiet. As for me, I just let out a long breath, because for once, the truth was standing on my side. Under the watchful eyes of the two officers, Derek dragged the suitcases down the steps and onto the driveway. He kept muttering under his breath, things like, "This is a misunderstanding," and "the old man's been worked up." But the more he talked, the more he sounded like a man who had already run out of moves. Megan stayed on the porch. Her eyes were red. She avoided looking at me for more than a second at a time, like she had just realized she'd been standing beside someone who humiliated her own father. I didn't yell at her. Yelling now would only push her back into defense mode. So I said one sentence. Calm, but heavy enough that it couldn't be ignored. "Megan, people make mistakes, but from today on, you have to choose." I paused for a moment. The truth, or that man. Derek turned back once before getting into the car. The look he gave me was pure hatred. Then he spat out one last line, like a promise more than a threat. "You're going to regret this, Frank." The car tore down the street, tires spitting gravel, and the house fell quiet again. But this silence wasn't peace. It was the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm. Because I knew men like Derek don't walk away quietly. They come back never to apologize, always to break something or get revenge. The difference now was simple. This time, I was ready. Cameras were already running. My phone had 911 on speed dial, and every piece of evidence was backed up in 3 different places. If Derek was stupid enough to come back, he wouldn't be walking away again. At first, I thought being thrown out by the police might make him disappear out of shame. But men like Derek don't feel shame. They feel resentment. And resentment makes people do very predictable things. Around midnight, the porch camera sent a motion alert. I checked the screen and there he was, Derek. He was staggering like a drunk, a baseball bat hanging loosely in his hand. He walked straight up to the mailbox and swung. Bang! The metal crumpled with a sharp, ugly sound that echoed down the quiet street. That still wasn't enough for him. He turned toward the garage door, pulled out a can of spray paint, and started scrawling across it like some territorial animal trying to leave a mark, like he wanted the whole neighborhood to know he was still in control. Then he pulled a crowbar from under his jacket and started prying at the edge of the garage door like a clumsy burglar. I didn't step outside to play hero. That's how people get hurt. Instead, I switched the cameras to record, kept my distance, and dialed 911. "My son-in-law just returned and is vandalizing my property," I told the dispatcher calmly. "I have full camera footage. Please send officers." Outside, Derek kept yelling toward the house. "Frank, open the door." Like somehow I owed him the house he'd just tried to steal. But this time, I didn't answer. I simply watched the camera feed and waited. Because when someone decides to destroy things on camera, they're really just collecting evidence against themselves. Then, the sound of sirens rolled down the street. Derek froze. For a split second, he looked around like an animal that suddenly realizes the trap has already snapped shut. This time, there was no running from the evidence. Inside the house, I stayed exactly where I was. The cameras were still recording, my phone still in my hand. I had no intention of stepping outside to talk like men. Talking to a drunk holding a crowbar is how people end up in the hospital, or worse. A few minutes later, red and blue lights washed across the windows. Officer Harris and Officer Cole stepped out of the patrol car. The moment Derek saw them, he switched roles instantly. The anger disappeared, replaced by that same fake innocence he'd tried earlier. He raised his hand slightly and started talking fast. "I'm just here to get my things," he said. "The old man's been provoking me. He's the one escalating this." But the problem for Derek was simple. The officers weren't arriving blind this time. They already knew the house. And more importantly, the cameras had seen everything. But cameras don't lie. I opened the door just enough to stay safe and held my phone out to the officers. The video showed everything clearly. Derek smashing the mailbox, spraying the garage door, prying at the edge with the crowbar. Officer Cole watched the clip for a few seconds, then looked back at Derek. "You're vandalizing property and attempting to force entry into someone else's home." Derek tried to argue, but the situation was already against him. The bat was still in his hand. The smell of alcohol was obvious, and the footage left no room for excuses. Officer Harris stepped forward, turned Derek around, and snapped the cuffs on. Click, right there on the front porch. I let out a long breath, not because I felt triumphant, because for the first time in a long while, things were exactly what they should be. Derek was finally facing the one thing he'd spent months trying to dodge: consequences. The patrol car pulled away with him in the back seat, the red and blue lights fading down the street. The yard fell quiet again, but this silence felt different. Not the silence of, "It's over." The silence before a conversation two people had avoided for far too long. A father and his daughter. Megan stood on the front steps, eyes red, hands shaking. There was nowhere left for her to hide behind Derek now. She looked at me, her voice breaking. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't think things would ever go this far." I didn't shout, and I didn't rush in with some cheap hug to make the moment easier. Instead, I spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "Megan, you don't need to apologize for being fooled." I paused, letting the weight of it settle. "But you do need to wake up. Because you let a man silence your own father. In this house." Megan lowered her head. I could see everything moving through her at once: shame, fear, that hollow feeling when someone realizes the ground under their life wasn't real. For 18 months, she had been living inside a story Derek wrote. And tonight, that story had collapsed right in front of her. I finished with one sentence, clear and final, like stamping a document. "Tomorrow, you sit down with me and my lawyer. I'll protect you, Megan. But I'm also going to teach you how not to let another man run your life again." The next morning, I didn't let emotions pull me back into that soft, familiar trap of, "Let's just forget it and keep the peace." That kind of peace is exactly how people like Derek get invited back in. So I called Alan Price and asked him to come over. Then I asked Megan to sit down with me at the kitchen table, the same table Derek had turned into his little stage of manipulation for the past 18 months. In front of her, first, the credit card statements showing $47,000 in charges. Second, the email chain with Willow Creek Memory Care, the plan to label me incompetent and sell the house. Third, the video from the night before, Derek smashing the mailbox and trying to pry open the garage. I didn't say anything for a moment. I just let Megan look at the evidence. Because sometimes the truth doesn't need a lecture. It just needs to be impossible to ignore. I said it plainly. "Megan, this is the truth. Not feelings, not stories, documents, and evidence." She looked down at the papers again, the statements, the emails. The video paused on the screen. There was no arguing with any of it. Alan stepped in and laid out the next steps like a checklist. First, file for protective measures. Second, freeze any accounts or financial access Derek had ever touched. Third, demand restitution for the $47,000. And finally, open a formal elder financial abuse case so Derek wouldn't be able to twist his way out of this later. No drama, no shouting, just the law doing its job. As for me, for the first time in a long while, I picked up the remote and turned the TV back on. Not because I desperately needed something to watch, but because I wanted to remind myself of one simple thing. This house is mine, and nobody gets to silence me in my own home again. From that moment forward, everything moved along the path of the law, not emotion. Alan Price filed the elder financial abuse complaint with the full package of evidence. The $47,000 in credit card statements, the email chain outlining Derek's plan, memory care, power of attorney, sell the house in 90 days, and the video of Derek coming back that night and vandalizing the property. From that moment on, Derek couldn't perform his little misunderstanding routine anymore. Every excuse he tried to throw out got crushed by documents and timestamps. The bank moved quickly. They froze the suspicious transactions and opened a formal fraud investigation. Alan also sent a legal demand for repayment and filed to prohibit Derek from coming near my house again. And Megan, she did something that mattered more than she probably realized. She signed a statement confirming that Derek had been manipulating the situation and using my financial information without permission. Once that document existed, Derek lost his favorite shield. He couldn't hide behind the line. My wife agreed, because now the truth had witnesses, paperwork, and a legal trail. And when truth is written down like that, people like Derek run out of places to hide. I changed every password in the house, bank accounts, email, utilities, everything. Then I went through every piece of paperwork tied to the property and my finances, making sure there wasn't a single loose thread Derek could pull on anymore. Any door he might have used to reach my money, my records, or my home. Slowly, carefully, completely. And that evening, for the first time in 18 months, I sat down in the living room again. I picked up the remote and turned the TV on, not because the TV mattered that much, but because it was the clearest signal of all. No one walked in and shut it off. No one mocked what I was watching. No one tried to make me feel small in my own house. The room was quiet. The screen lit up, and for the first time in a long time, the silence felt like peace instead of tension, because I had taken something back. Not just the house, my life.